Let's journey back through time. Our story doesn't begin among the gleaming marble columns of a triumphant empire. Instead, it starts in a small collection of mud huts huddled on the banks of the Tiber River. Picture the cool air and the smell of wood smoke from a few hundred small huts. This is where our story begins, in the quiet, stubborn determination of a small city that would one day rule the known world. For now, forget the cinematic legions and marble monuments. The Rome that grew into a giant was born in mud, smoke, and survival. Tonight, we'll trace the rise of the Roman Empire from these humble beginnings to its unstoppable ascent. Before we begin, thank you for being here. It's great to know there are others out there ready to travel back through the centuries. If you feel like it, you can comment below with where you're listening from. It's always a wonder to see how far our community reaches. Now, let us begin. Chapter 1. A city born of myth and mud. The Tiber River winds its way down from the Apennine Mountains, carrying the stories of the hills it has touched. Long before Rome was a republic, let alone an empire, it was a place of myth. The Romans themselves, in their later glory, told a story to make sense of their own unlikely beginning. They spoke of twin brothers, Romulus and Remus, sons of the god Mars, who were cast out as infants and left to the mercy of the river. The story goes that the basket carrying the two babies washed ashore where a she-wolf found and nursed them. This story of divine favor and brutal origins became a way for a powerful people to explain their destiny, but the reality was likely far more humble. While legend places Rome's founding at 753 BCE, archaeology suggests the real story began even earlier. The grand city of Rome likely started as a cluster of small villages in the famous Seven Hills. Perhaps as early as 1000 BCE, these were simple people in thatched huts, their lives governed by the seasons and a constant threat of their neighbors. Their world was no larger than the horizon of the Italian hills, and yet their location gave them a distinct advantage. They stood at a crossroads for trade, influenced by the advanced Etruscan civilization to their north and the Greek colonies to their south. These neighbors brought new ideas, the alphabet, coinage, and new ways of building and governing. For a time, Rome was ruled by kings, many of whom were Etruscan. It was under these kings that the city began to take shape. The marshy lowlands between the hills were drained, creating the space that would become the Roman Forum, the very heart of the city. Walls were built, and a single city began to emerge from the scattered villages. The legends say that the last king, Tarquinius Superbes, or Tarquin the Proud, was a tyrant. The crimes of his son sparked a rebellion, and in the year 509 BCE, the monarchy was overthrown. The Romans vowed they would never again be ruled by a king. In its place, they created something new, a republic. Power would be shared, held by two consuls elected for just 1 year, each with the power to veto the other. It was a system designed to keep any one person from becoming too powerful a principle, born from bitter experience. This wasn't just a political change, it was the forging of an identity. Rome was now a state built on laws, shared duty, and a suspicion of kings that would echo for centuries. Chapter 2. The Forging of a Republic. The early republic was a time of constant struggle. Rome wasn't born great. It fought for every inch of its territory. Surrounded by enemies, the young republic battled for its very survival. The Latin War, which ended in 338 BCE, was a crucial test. After defeating their former allies, Rome did something remarkable. Instead of simply crushing them, it offered a form of citizenship, a stake in Rome's growing power. In exchange for soldiers and loyalty, these conquered peoples became part of the Roman system. Its formula, conquer, then incorporate, would become the engine of Roman expansion. The wars against the Samnites, a fierce mountain people, lasted for more than half a century. By 290 BCE, Rome had secured its dominance over most of the Italian peninsula. Its legions, once a simple citizen militia, were becoming a disciplined and adaptable fighting force. They learned to fight in smaller, more flexible units called maniples, a tactical innovation that gave them an edge on the rugged Italian terrain. With Italy under its control, Rome's gaze turned outward across the sea, and there it met its greatest rival, Carthage. Located in modern-day Tunisia, Carthage was a vast maritime empire, trading powerhouse that controlled the western Mediterranean. A clash was inevitable. It came in 264 BCE over control of the island of Sicily. This was the beginning of the Punic Wars, a series of 3 conflicts that would become the ancient world's equivalent of a world war. The First Punic War was mostly a naval conflict. Rome, a land-based power, had to build a navy from scratch. It did so with characteristic determination, reverse engineering a captured Carthaginian ship. After more than 20 years of brutal fighting, Rome was victorious, gaining its first overseas province in Sicily. But the rivalry was far from over. The Second Punic War is the most famous, thanks almost entirely to one man, Hannibal Barca. In 218 BCE, Hannibal did the unthinkable. He led his army, complete with war elephants, on a perilous journey from Spain over the snow-covered Alps and into Italy itself. For years, he inflicted one crushing defeat after another on the Romans. The Battle of Cannae in 216 BCE was a catastrophe for Rome, a disaster where tens of thousands of its soldiers were lost in a single day. Any other state would have surrendered, but Rome did not. It refused to negotiate, raised new armies, and through sheer stubbornness, it endured. The Roman general Publius Cornelius Scipio, later known as Scipio Africanus, developed a new strategy. He avoided engaging Hannibal directly in Italy, and instead took the war to Carthaginian territory, first in Spain and then in North Africa. Hannibal was finally recalled to defend his homeland. The two great generals met at the Battle of Zama in 202 BCE. Scipio, having studied Hannibal's tactics, had a plan for the war elephants. He ordered his men to create lanes in their formations, letting the charging beasts run harmlessly through the gaps. The result was a decisive Roman victory. Carthage was defeated, its empire broken. Rome was now the undisputed master of the Western Mediterranean. Chapter 3: The Price of Power in the Fall of the Republic. The defeat of Carthage set Rome on a path of relentless expansion. With no real rival left in the West, Rome's legions turned east. One by one, the kingdoms of Greece and the Near East fell under Roman influence. The Battle of Pydna in 168 BCE saw the crushing defeat of the Macedonian king, effectively ending Macedonian independence. Soon, provinces were established in Greece, Asia Minor, and Syria. The wealth of the East, gold, art, slaves, and grain, poured into Rome, changing the city and its society forever. But this rapid expansion came at a price. The Republic's government, designed for a small city-state, started to crack under the strain of running a vast, multicultural empire. The immense wealth flowing into Rome widened the gap between the ultra-rich and the desperately poor. Small farmers, the traditional backbone of the army, were driven off their land by wealthy aristocrats who created massive plantations worked by enslaved people. These displaced citizens flocked to Rome, creating a huge, volatile, urban population. The late Republic became a time of social unrest and political violence. Reformers like the Gracchus brothers tried to solve the land crisis in the late 2nd century BCE, but they were met with violence and ultimately killed. Politics became a battlefield for ambitious generals who, with the loyalty of their professional armies, saw the state itself as a prize to be won. The old system of shared, limited power was breaking down. This turmoil led to a series of brutal civil wars. But the conflict between Julius Caesar and his rival, Pompey the Great, was the turning point. Caesar, a brilliant and ambitious general, had conquered Gaul for Rome, pushing its borders to the Atlantic. When the Senate fearing his power, ordered him to disband his army. He made a fateful choice. In 49 BCE, he led his legions across the Rubicon River, the legal boundary of Italy, effectively declaring war on his own country. Caesar's victory over Pompey left him the sole master of Rome. He was made dictator for life. And though he never called himself a king, he held the power of one. Many senators feared he would destroy the Republic for good. On the Ides of March, in 44 BCE, a group of senators assassinated him in the Senate House, believing they were saving the Republic. Their actions did the opposite. The assassination plunged Rome into another round of bloody civil wars. Out of this chaos, two figures emerged: Caesar's adopted son, Octavian, and his most trusted general, Mark Antony. For a while, they shared power, but their alliance soon crumbled into rivalry. The final showdown came at the naval battle of Actium in 31 BCE. Octavian's forces, led by his brilliant Admiral Agrippa, defeated the combined fleets of Antony and his ally, the Egyptian queen Cleopatra. The victory was absolute. Antony and Cleopatra fled to Egypt, where they would both take their own lives. With their deaths, Octavian was left as the unchallenged ruler of the Roman world. The Roman Republic, after nearly 500 years, was dead. A new era was about to begin. Chapter 4: The Empire and its Unstoppable Machine. After his victory, Octavian masterfully secured his power. He knew that Romans still hated the idea of a king, so he carefully avoided the title. In 27 BCE, the Senate gave him a new one, Augustus, meaning the revered one. He presented himself not as a monarch, but as the princeps, or first citizen, the man who had restored the Republic. This was a clever fiction. While old institutions like the Senate still met, all real power was now in his hands. The Roman Empire had begun. What followed was 2 centuries of relative peace and stability, known as the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. This was the empire's golden age, a time when its power and influence were at their absolute peak. What held this vast empire together wasn't just its legions, but the genius of its engineers. Roman engineering was a monument to their pragmatic, relentless pursuit of order and control. Perhaps their most famous achievement was their network of roads. The Romans built over 400,000 kilometers of roads, a system that connected the farthest corners of the empire, from the shores of Britain to the deserts of Mesopotamia. These weren't simple dirt tracks. Roman roads were sophisticated, multi-layered constructions with a foundation of stone, a layer of gravel for drainage, and topped with carefully fitted paving stones. They were built to last, and parts of them can still be seen today. Their main purpose was military, allowing legions to march at incredible speeds, but they also became the arteries of commerce and communication, binding the empire's diverse peoples together. Just as roads carried armies, aqueducts carried the lifeblood of the city's water. Roman engineers mastered the art and the principles of gravity to build monumental aqueducts that stretched for miles, carrying fresh water from distant springs into sprawling cities. Key structures, some still standing today, allowed cities like Rome to support over 1 million people, providing water for public baths, fountains, and private homes. This incredible construction was made possible by another Roman innovation: concrete. Roman concrete, especially a type made with volcanic ash called pozzolana, was incredibly strong, durable, and could even set underwater. This revolutionary material let them build on a scale never seen before. It gave us massive structures like the Colosseum, with seating for over 50,000 spectators, and the Pantheon, whose breathtaking, unsupported dome is still a marvel of engineering. From bridges that spanned mighty rivers to complex sewer systems that kept their cities clean, Roman engineering was the framework upon which the empire was built. Chapter 5: The Edges of the World. Under the emperors, the expansion continued. The borders of the empire were pushed to what the Romans considered the edges of the known world. In 43 CE, Emperor Claudius launched a successful invasion of Britain, a mysterious island on the fringe of the map. It wasn't an easy conquest, but Roman control was brutally solidified after the Battle of Watling Street in 61 CE there. The Roman governor, despite being vastly outnumbered, crushed the rebellion of the Celtic queen Boudica, securing the province for centuries. The empire reached its absolute greatest size under the Emperor Trajan, who reigned from 98 to 117 CE. Trajan was a soldier emperor with boundless ambition. He waged two major wars against the powerful kingdom of Dacia in modern-day Romania. The Dacian Wars were hard-fought, but ended in a complete Roman victory. Dacia was annexed, and its rich gold mines flooded the Roman treasury, funding massive building projects back home. The story of this conquest is famously depicted on the spiraling reliefs of Trajan's Column, which still stands in Rome. Trajan didn't stop there. He pushed eastward, campaigning against the Parthian Empire and adding Mesopotamia to Rome's vast holdings. For a brief moment, the Roman Empire stretched from the cold mists of northern Britain to the warm waters of the Persian Gulf. It spanned over 5 million square kilometers and was home to nearly a quarter of the world's population. It was possible to travel from one end of it to the other and never leave Roman territory. After Trajan, his successor, Hadrian, took a more defensive view. He believed the empire had grown as large as it could, and he focused on securing its borders. He's most famous for building Hadrian's Wall across northern Britain's massive fortification of stone and earth that marked the northernmost frontier of the Roman world. It was a powerful statement, a line drawn on the map to separate the Roman world from the barbarians beyond. Our story for tonight comes to a close here, at the peak of Roman power. The small city on the Tiber, born of mud and myth, had fulfilled a destiny grander than any of its founders could have imagined. It had conquered the known world through the resilience of its republic and the might of its legions. It then remade that world with its laws, language, concrete, and stone. For a time, it seemed the order Rome had created might last forever. The story of its long, slow decline is a tale for another night. For now, let's leave our minds on the image of this vast empire at its height, world bound together by roads, governed by a single authority, at peace under the watchful eye of the Roman eagle. The smoke from the early hearths has given way to the glow of 1,000,000 oil lamps across 1,000 cities. The work of survival has become the steady pulse of an empire in its prime. If you enjoyed learning about the rise of the Romans, make sure to like, subscribe, and check back next week for a video on the impending fall of their empire as well.